My name is Reverend David Woodall, and I'm with the Emsdale Pastoral Charge of the United Church of Canada. I'm wearing a slightly nicer shirt today than I did last week, still talking with you from my workbench office. I'm wearing a slightly nicer shirt because in my mind it symbolizes the growing awareness the disciples had that there was something bigger going on, that in that week after the resurrection, even though it was confusing, even though they wondered, even though there was bewilderment, they had a sense there was something bigger going on, and it called for some kind of personal response, some kind of personal and intentional encounter. The day of the resurrection began as a terrible day. There was confusion and anger, there was bewilderment, and then there was a weird and wonderful encounter. Mary goes to the tomb, discovers Jesus' body is gone, and then claims to have talked to him. Another gospel recounts the disciples racing to the tomb and stooping and looking in and wondering at what they saw, or in this case, what they didn't see. Earlier in the story, there was Pilate washing his hands of the whole deal, Herod scheming to arrange the execution of Jesus in order to keep the population from rebelling against Rome. There was Judas, and who knows what his motivation was. There was Peter, pretending he didn't know Jesus, because the authorities were hunting down the disciples. And then Peter's amazing transformation, becoming the rock, which we know today. So many people living their lives in the midst of calamity, confusion, hope, and despair, in the midst of schemes and struggles. How we live our lives in the midst of this confusing thing we call life is the subject of 100 books and 1,000 counseling sessions. How we live our lives today in the midst of this ongoing pandemic, physical distancing, and fear of a virus so small it could be anywhere, speaks a great deal about the kind of person you are, about the kind of person I am, about the kind of society that we inhabit. I was listening to Ken Callahan, who over the years has been a spiritual mentor for me. He told me this truly terrible story about Sandra. She was a mission worker who was working in South America. When she arrived in South America, for safety's sake, she had moved in with a local businessman. One night, while he was out, and she was home with his wife and daughter, some men with a grudge against this businessman broke in and raped the 3 women. Sandra returned to her home in the United States. How we live our lives in the midst of terror and in the midst of joy speaks a great deal about the kind of person you are and about the kind of person I am. Sandra, who was the daughter of a friend of Ken's, struggling through the aftermath of this rape, said this: "I am not going to be overcome by what they have done. I'm not going to allow what they have done to control me. I am a survivor. I will get beyond this. I will lead my life. With the grace of God, we will live our lives and not be the victims of every tragedy, trauma, whim, or sadness that comes our way. We will lead our lives and not just simply exist. It means to forgive ourselves when we make mistakes. It means to forgive others when they hurt us. Though I suspect for Sandra that it had more to do with her courage and compassion, her sense of who she was, and her capacity to survive that helped her through that time. Today for us, we are called to be intentional about how we live our lives, to show courage and compassion, a sense of who we are, and a capacity to not just survive through this time, but to live and lead and become even more. We've all had the privilege of hearing and seeing the stories of remarkable people intentionally putting their lives at risk to help and care for others. We have felt the anguish of nurses arriving in retirement homes, only to find the conditions so terrible that they were brought to tears. We watched funeral directors and healthcare workers piling bodies into empty hotel rooms. We watched our Prime Minister come out every day at 11 a.m. to provide us with the most current update of what was going on. We've heard from parents as they struggle to challenge their children's energy into education and crafts and activities, into quiet times and family game times. We know that this intense concentration of family time strains those family relationships, and perhaps they also strengthen them as we learn how to live together all the time. We have some idea of the struggles of children and teens as they cope with being with their parents all the time. Who would want to do that? And they probably wouldn't choose it voluntarily. Not seeing their friends, experiencing physical isolation, which really is social isolation. I was watching a movie the other night, and crowds of people were walking together over a bridge, and I thought, you're not physically distancing. What are you doing? And then I thought, oh yeah, that was another life. It was like another world. I wonder if we'll ever again get back to walking in crowds across a bridge. Then we hear about all the other people who are exploiting this time. The commercial break-ins are up, that there are fake cures and conspiracies that infect the internet. People ignoring warnings, and then they're bewildered and they're heartbroken about why their loved ones are dying, and they say, why didn't somebody else stop us? Yeah, why didn't somebody else stop us? With the grace of God, we will live our lives, and we will not be the victims of every tragedy, trauma, whim, or sadness that comes our way. We will lead our lives and not just simply exist. The way I live helps others to live also. How we lead our own lives teaches others how to live their lives. What we do matters. How we live matters. I've worked with leaders for many years, and what I have discovered is that most people live and lead in positive ways in normal circumstances. But when the circumstances are no longer normal, such as today, when tiredness or stress or challenging encounters occur, it's only then that you discover the true measure of a person. How in the midst of all of this will they conduct themselves? How in the midst of all of this will they choose to live their lives? Herod, Pilate, Mary, the disciples, Judas, Peter, Thomas, names of identity, which as soon as we hear them, we know who they are. They are the names of people who intentionally chose how to live their lives, for both good and bad. In the 2 weeks following Palm Sunday, the Christian narrative is littered with stories of how people led their lives, sometimes in healthy ways, sometimes in terrible ways. We think of the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. There was a moment of decision-making in that garden when the dreams of God could have gone either way. Jesus was there, struggling, not sure which direction to take. And then he chose, intentionally. God gives us the gift of life and then invites us to intentionally lead our own lives. Things happen to us, but our responses never just happen. And our response to anything can lead us into good futures or into dark corners. We can encourage life or destroy it. We can encourage hope or destroy it. Faith is a really powerful strength to have in your life. God intends to do many good and wonderful things, not only through you, but through all of us. And so today, it's our privilege to live in this time. This might be our Garden of Gethsemane, or it might be the confusing days following the resurrection, or it might simply be our life and the intentional choices that we make. So in this time, live with courage. Live with compassion. Don't just exist, but lead your life. Treasure this moment because there'll never be another moment quite like it. Treasure those you love, and even those you don't. And may God watch over all of us in this time. And may God bless you and all of those you love. Amen.